When you walk by every night, talking sweet and looking fine, I get kinda hectic inside. Wait, are we not talking about that kind of fantasy? Oh, this is wrong. Okay, well, stay tuned because we're going to talk about fantasy books today. All right, I really hope that intro does not get me demonetized, Mariah. All respect to you. I can't even compete. I'm MK Williams. This is not a singing channel. I'm an author and an independent publisher. I love sharing my insights about all things books and publishing with you. Before I get into the details of today's topic, don't forget to hit subscribe. I promise I will never sing again. You'll be notified every week when I put out new videos about publishing, making a career to being an author, and now being a mompreneur. Now that we all have Mariah Carey's classic song Fantasy stuck in our heads, let's talk about the fantasy genre of books. I told y'all it was going to take me all year to do this series, and it will probably spill over into next year. So the fantasy genre is one where authors can see a lot of success in both the traditional publishing and the self-publishing arenas. As with the other videos in this series, I did a lot of research for this video for the official terms and definitions, so I'm going to reference all of those in the video and in links below as well. Let's start with the basics. So according to the Encyclopedia Britannica, fantasy is imaginative fiction dependent for effect on strangeness of setting, such as other worlds or times, and of characters, such as supernatural or unnatural beings. Examples include William Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream, Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels, J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings, and T.H. White's The Once and Future King. I also found a lot of other examples like Alice in Wonderland, The Wizard of Oz, American Gods by Neil Gaiman, The Brothers Grimm, Grimm Fairy Tales, A Court of Thorn and Roses by Sarah J. Maas, which, if you didn't know about it, you've been living under a rock, Blood of the Lily by S.D. Houston, Twilight, of course, and Interview with a Van Lifer by me. So in general, there's magic here. So whether it's spells or intuitive telekinesis, vampires and werewolves and elves and sprites and fairies, all the different ways that you spell fairies. It all makes sense that once the reader learns about this world and the magic system and kind of the hierarchy of these magical beings or whatever this other thing is, they want to stay there. Hence, fantasy series are so popular. Now, speaking of vampires, that does bring me to the sponsor of today's video, which is Interview with a Van Lifer. The one question no one is asking about the current climate crisis is, how does this affect the vampire population? Scoring an exclusive interview with Peter and Ursula, the now internet famous influencers and van lifers, our narrator details their evening in Yosemite National Park with the pair of vampires. In this satirical short story, we'll learn about Peter and Ursula's experience as vampires, their unique risks as the climate continues to change, and how they plan to use their celebrity to influence public policy and help the climate insecure. The story presents itself as an interview where the reader will go through the well-documented challenges of vampires among us and the new issues arising from climate chaos. A continuation of the fictional evolution of vampires, following in the footsteps of Anne Rice's Interview with a Vampire, this short story shows a different class of vampires, socially conscious environmentalists with an eye for photography and a growing online brand. These influencers are looking to bring the vampire community into the light. Now, if you are reading fantasy, that's a commitment. If you're writing fantasy, you'll have a really big manuscript. So the word counts tend to go above 100,000 words because there needs to be a lot of explanation of the world, the magic system, new places, etc. Usually the readers of this genre enjoy learning about the world, but you still don't want to stray too much into too much telling instead of showing when it comes to some of these different systems. So I think there are really clear preferences for the subgenres for each reader. So I'm going to break down what those different subgenres are. And likely if you enjoy fantasy, you'll probably be able to identify really quickly which ones you enjoy, which ones you don't. So the first is high fantasy or epic fantasy. It's in a realm, a totally new place no one has ever been to. There are magic systems and lords and kings and sometimes rings. Low fantasy or urban fantasy. So this is what's in our world and in our cities. So some magical systems may come also from high fantasy, but they're here in our world interacting with the things that we can understand. Magical realism. Now this is a slight distinction from the low fantasy or urban fantasy, but this would be a subcategory of low fantasy, and that there's one fantastic element or one bit of magic, maybe like just telekinesis. Sword and sorcery, that kind of says it in the name what that one's about. Dark fantasy. So this is a twist where you have the magical elements also interacting with horror. So perhaps this is a modern day monster among us, but it's not a friendly monster, hence the horror element. Fables and fairy tales. So retellings have been really popular in the past few years. Retellings of fables and fairy tales would definitely fall in this category. Again, a little bit self-explanatory. There's superhero fiction. Yep, they have powers and they're usually in our world, but they get their own special subgenre because they really are their own separate thing. And of course, we can't forget the ever popular romantasy. That's right. Romance, fantasy, romantasy. There you go. Now, I tend to prefer urban fantasy and magical realism as to high fantasy. Definitely let me know below what kind of fantasy books do you like to read. Now, for high fantasy and swords and sorcery subgenres, you're probably going to see maybe a map of some kind, or maybe an index of each family and their powers, because there does tend to be a lot. And usually these readers really like these elements. So if you're writing, you might want to save a little bit to invest in getting one of those maps or diagrams made. Okay, what are some of your favorite fantasy books and series that I didn't mention? There are so many, and I would love to know about more. Which ones should I be checking out? Let's keep the conversation going in the comments below. If you found this video informational or entertaining, or if you truly never want me to sing on this channel again, please hit like, subscribe, or even think about hitting that thanks button. That lets YouTube know you got value from this information, and they can get it in front of other authors like us. Now you can get back to writing your book.